Hello and welcome to the Small Business Briefing, a service of the Small Business Association of Michigan. I am Brian Calley and I'm honored to lead this organization.
Hi, everyone. Sarah Miller, Vice President of Marketing and Strategic Communications for SBAM. Thanks for joining us today. I want to say a quick thank you to our sponsor, SBAM Energy Solutions. You can find out how your business can become more energy efficient at sbam.org/energy. All right, so let's get started with today's show. Let's talk about CompuWare. The company is moving out of downtown Detroit. So any guesses as to why and then what the implications will be?
Yeah, there was kind of a scoop in Cranes yesterday that suggested that CompuWare is moving out of downtown and to Southfield. And for those who have been around for a while might remember that CompuWare was one of those kind of pioneer companies 20 years ago that moved from the suburbs to downtown. There's a building right downtown, right in that Campus Martius block, and it was kind of a celebrated move at that point. And so that reversal of that trend is really kind of surprising, but it also touches on how the fallout from the way that things have changed in response to the pandemic is still happening. So I've often described our recovery period in the last couple of years from the depths of the pandemic as being kind of a tale of two cities, where you have some areas that have really taken off and done well, but those core downtown areas that were over the last 20 years were experiencing somewhat of a resurgence, not just in Detroit, in a lot of places, have been in some of the hardest hit areas and the ones that haven't really fully recovered. And this would be an indication that maybe they won't recover or won't look the same way as they did before, or have to be kind of reinvented again. Now, why would they be making a move like this? We have heard a lot of concerns of businesses in city areas about crime. So we've had some increases in the last couple of years in crime, and also homelessness, and just kind of the interaction between business and people in downtown areas, and just been more difficult. I don't know that that's the case here, but we have heard that type of feedback from cities around the state, and also just the idea that most of the employees don't live in the city. And so when you've got kind of a remote type of a work environment, and you're kind of coming and going, I wouldn't be surprised if the idea that so many workers that are coming from Oakland County or Livingston County would find it much less desirable to have to go all the way downtown. You might think, well, but you have to do it fewer times a week, perhaps, in a remote or hybrid work environment. But even then, it seems maybe even less worth it to spend that much time on the road. So this is, I think, a pretty clear indication that our core downtown areas, they're in for big changes. And something to really keep in mind: small businesses in those areas that rely on that type of traffic, or used to rely on that type of traffic in the past, they're not experiencing the same type of outcomes and growth and recovery as businesses that did not have a business model built around office worker traffic that has just evaporated and looks less and less likely every day to ever look like it did before.
All right, now let's talk about GDP. We have some new information there. What are we learning?
Yeah, GDP, third quarter GDP numbers came in about as expected, actually a little bit higher, 2.6% growth. So this is kind of the overall gross domestic product. In the face of inflation, remember, this is kind of a tricky, we talked about this before. It's less impressive to see GDP growth during times of inflation, just because it's kind of hard to adjust for that in terms of what's real growth and what's not. But nevertheless, it's a reprieve from a lot of bad news, and that has been out over the last little while. You might remember on Monday, I talked a little bit about and I showed an example of a inverted yield curve. So this is like um, treasury yields, treasury bonds, so very safe investments. In the 3-month treasury yield was paying more than the 10-year treasury yield for a small amount of time last year. That's a pretty strong indication of future recessionary times. And it went inverted last week for just a little while, but this week it went inverted and stayed inverted. And so definitely has one of those indicators that people look at. Now, why would that be, by the way? Think about it. Why is it unusual that a 3-month treasury would pay a higher interest rate than a 10-year treasury in terms of the yield, interest rate yield? Well, if you think about it logically, if you're putting money away for a longer period of time, you're going to want a higher return than if you have a short period of time. But right now, the short-term money is more. And generally what that means is that investors across the board, from big to small, are kind of fleeing other short-term investments and putting them into very safe investments. In other words, looking for places to put their money that is less risky than what they're perceiving out there in the marketplace. And so it pushes up those shorter term yields, in addition to the fact that the base rates with the Federal Reserve have been increased. But that's not what changed in the last week. The rates haven't changed in the last week in terms of the Federal Reserve, and therefore it really is kind of investor sentiment out there. And investors, they're not perfect predictors, but this particular one has been a pretty accurate predictor of the future. When you compare it or look at past practices, that when investors as a whole are kind of moving together, then that sentiment means something. It's actually a better predictor than most of the things that people use in terms of its accuracy in the past. So something to keep in mind. So we got a little reprieve from some of the bad news that has been out there. That GDP came in as expected, or even a little bit better. A lot of things have been coming in lower than expected these days. So good news that we can hold on to while we have it, although not unexpected, and therefore probably I would say not necessarily doesn't necessarily change any kind of expectations on in the future based on all the other challenges that we still have.
All right, so since we last met on Monday, there has been another gubernatorial debate. Any surprises there, and what are your takeaways?
Well, both candidates, so you had Governor Gretchen Whitmer and challenger Tudor Dixon, both candidates kind of came out swinging. So it was a pretty aggressive debate compared to the last one, focused on several issues. Both candidates had some kind of zingers that they were able to insert or land, but it started to become clear the issues that they're settling on. I think both candidates are responding to public sentiment that is moving numbers out there. You heard a lot about crime and support for law enforcement. Now, you might recall just a couple of years ago that there was a lot of anti-law enforcement sentiment, especially in 2020, and in the political world. But that didn't necessarily mean that just regular people felt that way. And so now what we see happening here in Michigan and also nationwide is that both sides of the political aisle are kind of rushing to a pro-police message. And so we do see crime and law and support of law enforcement kind of taking center stage. And then also with the education numbers that have come out here recently, confirming what we already knew, that the pandemic was particularly hard on the education of children, that has played a pretty central role as well. The thing that really stuck out to me about this campaign about that debate, it wasn't just the debate itself, but what happened the day after the debate. And So before with Governor Whitmer's campaign having a staff of almost 50 people, which is enormous. The Dixon campaign just had a handful of people at the time of the primary in August. Now they're up to about 20 staffers. So they've got actual, people that are running things. I thought that the matchup the day after the debate looked pretty even, whereas before Whitmer's organization and team had really kind of dominated the social media play and the clips and stuff the day after the debate, the first debate. This time it looked very evenly matched. And so what you see kind of coming down the pike here is you see as things kind of tighten, a lot of the national players are getting involved. And so you see both of our former presidents, our last two former presidents, are getting involved here in Michigan. We see a commercial from President Obama for Gretchen Whitmer, and he got a little bit of ribbing because he said Michigander instead of Michigander in the commercial, but really looking at ways to ensure the Whitmer supporters looking at ways to ensure that turnout among Democrats, especially in heavily Democratic areas like Detroit, are high, and in the Democratic Party, President Obama is very, very popular. And then also the MAGA PAC, that is President Trump's PAC, has also done some advertising, launched just yesterday. And so on the air with commercials here in Michigan, in addition to some other third-party operators that have come in, kind of air support for Tudor Dixon. So you see national players that are getting involved here in Michigan now. You see a lot of kind of like maturing of the staff and the campaign operations as we head into the last 2 weeks, and it looks very evenly matched to me. I thought one thing I would do is to share with you just something that just a website that I frequent, which is 538. So this is Nate Silver's election predictor system. That it's a place you can look at all of the polls, all the public polls that have been released. And if you look at this, you see that the margins here are between Whitmer +6 to Dixon +1. So this range of variations in the polling is pretty average these days to see a range that big between all these different pollsters. What Nate does is he rates the pollsters for accuracy, and so and then he does kind of a weighted average in terms of the overall, like all of these polls together and what do they mean. But he also looks at other factors, like in Michigan, incumbents usually are usually reelected their first reelection, and so this is his he has a system where he runs 40,000 simulations of the election with all these different factors changing. And what he says is that even though the polling is close, you can see definitely that in the polling, usually all except for one, Whitmer was ahead just by a narrow margin. That they ran in terms of the different types of simulations, that 13% of the time Dixon wins in their simulations, and 87% of the time Whitmer wins. So I thought that was just something to just kind of share, that as you see these polling margins close, Whitmer's close to 50%, and that means that that Dixon would have to win all of the undecided voters. Clearly, most of the undecided voters, according to all this polling that's been out recently, have been moving toward the Republican challenger. But when the incumbent is already at 50, there's something additional that the challenger needs. And what that challenger, in this case, needs is for the turnout models to change a bit. So either for Democrats to be less enthusiastic and therefore low propensity Democrats maybe not voting, or they get more low propensity voters on the Republican side to show up to the polls. And so that's really the thing, the reason why I think the prediction model there looks like it's pretty heavily weighted in the incumbent's favor, is because it takes those types of considerations into consideration. But if you were to look at that same predictor model a month ago, it had Dixon's chances much lower. So you see it getting more evenly matched. And while the prediction model, I think, is going to always show Whitmer as a favorite, the right on probably through to election day, because of these factors that are difficult to predict. Who's going to show up to vote is difficult to predict. Nevertheless, here we are 2 weeks out, and what looked like a minuscule chance has turned into a serious chance. 13% chance is not insignificant. And it's likely to get closer and closer as we get to election day, because here in Michigan, my experience is that it always ends up closer than it looks 2 weeks out, regardless of who's ahead, whether it's a Republican ahead or a Democrat ahead. By the time you get to election day, it looks closer, or it ends up closer than it looked like it would be 2 weeks out. So very dynamic situation. Expect the volume level to keep on going up, because Michigan is now on the radar screen for a lot of third parties, including former presidents around the country. And I expect that attention will be with us throughout the duration.
So we've covered the top of the ticket quite a bit, but what about the House and Senate seats? Do we have some other races we want to talk about today, ones you're keeping an eye on?
Yeah, there's the legislature is in, it really is in the type of battle that we have not seen in a very long time. So where things are pretty evenly matched, where the overall for the entire cycle, I think when all the dust settles, it's hard to keep track of in real time, but if you look at the TV buys and the advantage that Democrats have had, they've hit usually in state legislative races, Democrats have not been able to raise as much money. I think when all the dust settles, you're going to see that the Democrats will have had more than the Republicans, both in the House and the Senate, probably millions more. And so that's a different factor than what we've seen in the past. Now, that said, the House of Representatives still looks very likely to me to end up with a Republican majority. And in the Senate, it just looks too close to call at this point. Both sides going after it very aggressively. I was looking at the last quarter's financial campaign finance reports for the campaign committees of the House and the Senate for both sides, and basically the way it turned out was that the Republicans have more cash on hand. The Democrats actually raised more in the last quarter. So when you consider those factors and just the aggressive nature of these campaigns being on the air so much, including broadcast TV in the competitive seats in Detroit, which is extremely expensive. You don't normally see a lot of broadcast TV for state legislative races. When you see that type of action, there's way more money at play than what we normally see. So it's really going to come down, though, I think, in the Senate to just a handful of races. And so you've got a race where there's one of the seats that goes from the city of Detroit up into Macomb County. There's an incumbent, Senator McDonald, that is locked in a very close and competitive race, and then an open seat just north of that in Macomb County, which is Kevin Hertel versus Pamela Hornberger. And both of them state representatives running for the state Senate. And then there's an unexpectedly close race in the Downriver area, which is south of Detroit, down to Monroe County. And those downriver communities used to be solid Democratic areas, now swing areas. just the way that the political attitudes in that area have changed. They're pretty breathtaking over the last 10 years. But you've got a newcomer, Houston, on the Republican side, running against a state representative, Camilleri, on the Democratic side, and so those two are locked in quite a battle. One that I don't think that people a few months ago thought was going to be so close, based on the spending. I haven't seen polling in this race. Based on the high amount of spending on both sides, this is clearly a competitive race. And then over in Grand Rapids, you've got kind of a marquee matchup between Mark Huizenga and David LeGrand that is viewed as very close. Both sides going at it, spending tons of resources. And then the final one I'll mention is Midland and Saginaw counties, and I think Bay as well, where you have a state representative versus a newcomer, at least not somebody who served in the legislature before, Annette Glenn, the Republican, against Rivet, the Democrat there. Another one where both sides are spending very heavily, which means it's in play. So those are the races out of 38 Senate seats. Those are the races that will decide the majority. The Republicans really need Huizenga and Glenn. So Grand Rapids and that Midland Saginaw seat, they really need those seats to hit a 20-seat majority. If the Democrats can pick off either one of those and hold the other two, that some conventional wisdom says that they're a little more likely to win, then it could be a 19-19 tie or a 2018 majority for Democrats. So just a small number of seats will determine the majority there, and they both look very competitive. One other race I want to mention too that we haven't talked a lot about, another statewide race, which is the race for Attorney General. You see incumbent Dana Nessel versus challenger Matt DePerno, and if you look at all this public polling where they ask the governor question, the usually Whitmer, whatever Whitmer's at, Nessel, the Democratic Attorney General, is usually 3, 4, 5 points behind Whitmer, lower than Whitmer. So in other words, not as popular as Governor Whitmer. And so when you look at these races that show a narrowing between Dixon and Whitmer, then it's kind of a logical assumption that that means that the Attorney General race is absolutely in play. Now, again, other than a few public polls that have been out, none of them that are particularly new, I don't have any kind of inside information about it. But what I can see is that spending on both sides is going up, and national groups coming in, focusing on this. And when that happens, it means they don't come in unless they've done their own polling and believe that that race is in place. So let me go ahead and put that on everybody's radar screen, that the Attorney General's race in Michigan, I think, will be very close, probably more likely for the incumbent Attorney General to lose than it is for the incumbent governor to lose. Okay, so in other words, I think that the top of the ticket looks competitive, and I think it'll come down. It'll be a close race at the end of the day, but the Attorney General is the race that would be more likely to flip. So a lot of things to follow. Of course, I keep really close track of this, interested in it, used to work directly in it, but so we will write down the line, but to make sure that everybody keeps in mind and understands on these state legislative races in particular, SBAM vets and endorses candidates. So we go through and find the candidates that are the most pro small business, have got records that we can look back on and rely on, and then endorse. And would love for anybody watching this and all of our members to really consult with that endorsement list right on our website, very prominently on our website now. Between now and the election, to just peruse through, see if in your district we have a favorite candidate that has been vetted and determined to be pro small business, both in deed and word, and then to support them, because at the end of the day, when we're trying to create a pro small business environment in Michigan, it means it really is built around the policies in our state, and the policymakers are elected in the political system. So we don't love politics, but we do love a pro small business Michigan, and that means we've got to engage in politics to make that happen. So much happening, a lot of things up in the air, and I guess I'll just say buckle up, because Michigan, there'll be a lot of eyes on Michigan. Didn't look like it would be the case a month ago. There'll be a lot of eyes on Michigan for this last 2 weeks.
All right, well, we'll continue to have updates on the briefing between now and the election, and then after the election too, we can debrief everything. So I want to give a little plug for SBAM membership right now. Hopefully all of you watching are already members, but if you're not, you can join in the month of October and save with a special promotion we're running. Or if you're at a level of membership and you're considering upgrading to the next level, you can also save on that upgrade as well. So between now and October 31st, you can email membership@sbam.org or sbam@sbam.org, and we'll fill you in on the details. But just didn't want to let the month go by without mentioning that special fall promo. And then I also wanted to let everyone know we have some events coming up. Next week, we have 2 webinars. One is called The Modern Workforce. When is the right time to purchase, expand, or renovate your office? And we're also doing one on reevaluating your company's retirement benefits. So those can be found at sbam.org/events. Finally, 2 upcoming owner-to-owner events. Remember, these are exclusively for small business owners to connect with other business owners in your region. We'll be in Kalamazoo November 2nd, the Crawl Space Comedy Theater, and we'll be in Ypsilanti November 9th at the Folding Warehouse. So those sound like 2 super cool, fun event spaces. If you are in those areas and you're a business owner, please register and join us there. Again, sbam.org/events. So that's kind of my housekeeping for today. We'll be back here on Monday. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.
Happy MSU versus U of M weekend. Good luck to everybody. I'm in the camp of faithful, but maybe hopeless. And but still, hey, anything can happen. That's why they still play the game. So thanks, everybody. See you soon.
Go green.
Go white.